At 41, Pippa Middleton is finally lifting the veil on the truth behind her divorce from James Matthews, and it's a revelation no one saw coming. For years, she has been the picture of poise and elegance, the ever-gracious sister to the Princess of Wales. From glamorous galas to fairy tale wedding photos, her life seemed nothing short of perfection. But behind that sparkling exterior, cracks began to form. "I have felt publicly bullied," Pippa recently confessed, her voice soft yet resolute. "It's hard sometimes reading the things people say. For a woman who has made a career out of keeping her personal life under wraps, these words carry weight." And now, after years of silence, Pippa is speaking out, finally shedding light on the untold story behind the marriage that seemed rock solid. What really pushed her to walk away from it all? And why now? Let's take a step back and unpack Pippa's story, starting from the very beginning. Before the world knew her as the sister of a future princess, Pippa Middleton was just another young woman from the quiet village of Bucklebury, Berkshire. Raised in a modest, loving household alongside her older sister Catherine, who would later be crowned as Princess Kate, Pippa's early life was grounded in the values of family and hard work. But it wasn't long before the world took notice. Pippa had an undeniable presence, a radiant energy that made her stand out, even next to her poised and composed older sister. The contrast between the two was striking, not because Pippa tried to outshine Kate, but because she simply couldn't help it. It might seem as if Pippa and her sister were born into luxury, perhaps even royalty, but the truth is far from it. The Middleton family didn't inherit wealth or title. They built their life from the ground up. Their father, Michael, was a former flight dispatcher, and their mother, Carol, worked as a flight attendant. Together, they launched a successful party supply business, which afforded the family a comfortable life, but nothing extravagant. No palaces, no private jets, just good schools, family vacations, and a focus on manners, humility, and a strong work ethic. That all changed when Kate's relationship with Prince William became public. What started as mere curiosity soon turned into an obsession. As Kate's relationship with the future king progressed, Pippa became a fixture in the media, seen as the charming, relatable sister-in-law-to-be. The spotlight soon shifted from being on Kate's relationship to focusing on Pippa, whose every move was scrutinized by the press. It was during this period that Pippa's life began to take a different trajectory, one that would lead her to a marriage with James Matthews, a man who appeared to be the perfect match. Yet, the fairy tale would not last. Why did Pippa's seemingly perfect marriage unravel, and what led her to break her silence after years of keeping the details to herself? The story is more complicated than anyone could have imagined, and Pippa's courage to finally speak out may change the way we see her and the world she navigates. At 41, Pippa Middleton is finally breaking her silence on the real reasons behind her divorce from James Matthews, reasons that are far more complex than anyone could have imagined. For years, Pippa was the picture-perfect sister of the Princess of Wales, known for her elegance, grace, and picture-perfect life. She attended glamorous events, flashed a radiant smile for the cameras, and had a seemingly fairy tale marriage. But as anyone with a glimpse of insight knows, there's often more beneath the surface. In a rare interview, Pippa acknowledged the difficult side of her life in the public eye. "It's hard sometimes," she admitted, reflecting on the public scrutiny she had endured. "I've felt publicly bullied when I read things." It's a vulnerability that her admirers weren't used to seeing. So what really led Pippa to walk away from a marriage that appeared unbreakable? And why is she speaking out now after keeping so much of her personal life private for so long? Let's dive into the untold story behind Pippa's marriage and what ultimately led to its unraveling. Before she became a household name, Pippa Middleton led a quiet, relatively ordinary life in the small Berkshire village of Bucklebury, England. Her family lived modestly, with both her parents working in the aviation industry, her father, Michael, a former flight dispatcher, and her mother, Carol, a former flight attendant. The Middletons weren't born into wealth or royal privilege. They built their modest fortune with a party supply business, which provided a comfortable, though not extravagant, lifestyle for Pippa and her older sister, Catherine, later to become known as Princess Kate. But everything changed the moment Kate's relationship with Prince William became public. First, the world was curious. Then, it was obsessed. Pippa, who had previously lived a life of relative anonymity, suddenly found herself thrust into the public eye, simply by being Kate's sister. What began as mere curiosity soon turned into media frenzy, with Pippa's every move scrutinized by a ravenous press. And when Kate married Prince William in 2011, Pippa's moment came, and it was as iconic as they come. Dressed as the maid of honor in a simple yet stunning white dress, Pippa stole the spotlight at Westminster Abbey. She wasn't trying to overshadow her sister, but in that moment, she did. Her figure-hugging gown went viral, and Pippa became the internet's obsession. Within hours, she had gone from being relatively unknown to the it girl of the year. In fact, her dress became the most searched fashion item of the year. Pippa had become a global sensation. From that point on, Pippa's life was never the same. Paparazzi were camped outside her home. Journalists dug into her past, even the quiet, pre-royal years of her life. The media scrutinized everything, from her gym sessions to the shoes she wore on a night out. While the attention was flattering in some ways, it was overwhelming and invasive. Pippa, who was never prepared for fame, was now forced to navigate it without a playbook. She quickly learned that being in the spotlight meant surrendering the most precious thing, privacy. But the most intense pressure came in the form of her dating life. Her romance with former cricketer Alex Loudon was no longer private. It became tabloid fodder. What had once been a quiet love affair was now being followed by cameras wherever they went. Whether they were walking through London or vacationing together, every moment was captured, dissected, and commented on by strangers. Even after her breakup with Alex, the media was relentless. Any man seen with Pippa quickly became the subject of speculation. She later admitted to the emotional toll that such an intrusion had on her. Her personal life, which had once been private, had become a public spectacle. This unwanted attention, combined with the immense pressure of public scrutiny, added an immense strain to her marriage. The cracks in her seemingly perfect life began to show, ultimately leading her to the decision to walk away from her relationship with James Matthews. So why speak up now, after all these years? Perhaps after experiencing so much of her life in the glare of the public eye, Pippa feels that it's time to reveal the truth behind her private struggles. The woman who once captured the world's attention as the graceful sister of the Duchess of Cambridge is now ready to share the truth of what was really going on behind the scenes. The story behind Pippa Middleton's journey, her marriage, and her struggle with fame is one of resilience, vulnerability, and, ultimately, self-discovery. When Pippa Middleton began dating Nico Jackson, a young and flashy stockbroker, the intensity of the media frenzy only increased. Nico, with his stylish wardrobe, wealth, and confidence, seemed like the perfect match, a reflection of the life Pippa had been thrust into. The couple was seen traveling the world, attending high-profile events, and posing effortlessly for cameras. But despite the outward appearances, something about the relationship never quite clicked in the way the public expected. The constant media attention had transformed Pippa's love life into a bizarre spectacle. In the eyes of the media, she had become the center of a strange love triangle. First, there was Alex, her safe, familiar past. Then, Nico, modern, ambitious, and the epitome of the life she had become a part of. Finally, there was James Matthews. Each man represented a different stage of Pippa's journey, but none seemed to offer the stability she longed for. And then came James, a man who wasn't just a face in the crowd, but someone who had his own wealth and public presence, yet preferred to remain out of the spotlight. Pippa met James in St. Bart's, where his family owned a luxury hotel. He exuded calm, stability, and a quiet confidence that stood in stark contrast to the flashy world she had been living in. Choosing James, Pippa revealed, wasn't just about love. It was about peace, normality, and the desire for a quieter, more grounded future away from the limelight. But choosing James wasn't the end of Pippa's journey. What happened next would surprise everyone, and it was a path filled with complexities that no one expected. In 2016, when Pippa Middleton and James Matthews finally went public with their relationship, the media went into overdrive. After years of being pursued by paparazzi and hailed as the world's most eligible woman, Pippa had finally found someone who seemed to be a perfect match: steady, wealthy, and willing to step outside the royal bubble. Their relationship was a contrast to her past romances, and the press devoured every detail. Within a year, the two were married in an extravagant ceremony that made headlines around the globe. The wedding was pure luxury. Pippa wore a lace Giles Deacon gown, and the floral arch framing their vows was a picture-perfect moment. It looked like the fairy tale ending the world had been waiting for. But beneath the surface, the relationship was quietly complicated from the start. It was almost as if Pippa's wedding mirrored the royal grandeur of her sister's marriage, but with a more understated approach. Pippa Middleton, the world's most famous bridesmaid, was now stepping into the spotlight as a bride. For once, it was all about her. James Matthews, for his part, wasn't a stranger to success. A former race car driver turned hedge fund manager, James had built his fortune through hard work and smart investments. But unlike the celebrities who thrived on attention, James was reserved and highly protective of his privacy. He preferred quiet dinners with close friends to red carpet events, and his public appearances were rare. His life had been shaped by a need for discretion, not fame. Pippa, on the other hand, had been living in the public eye for years. Since her sister married Prince William, Pippa had become a fixture in the media, never quite seeking the spotlight, but always in it nonetheless. She was photographed at high society events, mingled with fashion elites, and had become skilled at managing the public's obsession with her. It's clear that Pippa's life, while glamorous, was no fairy tale. Behind the carefully curated public persona, there were challenges and pressures few could imagine. Choosing James Matthews was about finding peace, yes, but it was also about navigating the tension between her private desires and the world that was always watching. According to insiders close to Pippa Middleton and James Matthews, their marriage had become a study in contrasts. They were two individuals from very different worlds trying to coexist in the same space, each bringing their own distinct energy to their shared life. James, by nature, gravitated toward routine and silence, preferring the peace and quiet of private moments away from the public eye. Pippa, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of energy, always the life of the party, brimming with style and charm. She was still renowned for that iconic white Alexander McQueen dress she wore as maid of honor at her sister Kate's royal wedding in 2011. Years later, the fashion industry continued to credit her for making sleek, minimalist bridal party dresses a trend again. That single moment, immortalized in the media, had opened doors for her that she never quite anticipated. In the years that followed, Pippa dabbled in various entrepreneurial ventures. She wrote a lifestyle book, Celebrate, delved into event planning, and even explored branding opportunities. While not all of her projects garnered the success she hoped for, they kept her name circulating in the media and cemented her place in the public's eye. But the constant spotlight, while lucrative, came with its own set of problems. Pippa was no stranger to the darker side of fame. Shortly after her sister's wedding, paparazzi snapped intrusive bikini photos of her while she was on a private family holiday aboard a yacht. The images were plastered across tabloids worldwide, sparking outrage and prompting legal battles. The Middletons fought back, and the case ended in their favor. However, for Pippa, the damage went beyond legal wins. It was deeply personal. That incident marked one of the first times she truly understood the invasive nature of fame. It haunted her for years, even as she continued to appear in public with a smile at charity galas and high-profile Fashion Week parties. By the time Pippa married James in 2017, the sheen of glamour still shone brightly from the outside, but cracks had already begun to form beneath the surface. The couple lived in a luxurious, multi-million-pound townhouse in West London, a symbol of their wealth and success. However, as time passed, their paths began to drift further apart. It became evident that James, ever the private individual, was increasingly uncomfortable with the spotlight. He was not just reluctant to step out into public view, he actively avoided it, preferring private clubs, golf courses, and business meetings to the social gatherings where Pippa thrived. Pippa, who had initially tried to pull back from the media as a gesture of compromise, soon found herself right back where she started, attending high-profile events, granting style interviews, and appearing on red carpets. Her name was synonymous with elegance and high society, and she couldn't help but be drawn back into the world she had known for so long. As the years went by, their social lives began to look like two completely separate entities. James remained tucked away in private settings, while Pippa immersed herself in the glittering world of Wimbledon, royal events, and fitness campaigns. Their appearances together became rare, their public outings even rarer. The media, always hungry for a story, began to ask questions. Why weren't they seen together anymore? Where had the once inseparable couple gone? The questions lingered, unanswered, as the cracks in their marriage deepened. But what happened next would leave everyone shocked. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the unraveling of Pippa Middleton and James Matthews' marriage and the twists no one saw coming. As Pippa Middleton's marriage to James Matthews faced mounting pressure, those close to her began to notice a subtle but undeniable shift. Her style, once bold and daring, began to fade into more neutral tones. Gone were the vibrant colors and daring silhouettes that had once defined her fashion sense. Instead, her wardrobe became more muted, almost as if she were retreating into herself. Some observers labeled the change as a sign of maturity, while others read it as loneliness. Regardless of how it was interpreted, one thing was clear. Pippa was no longer the confident, effervescent woman who once strutted confidently at royal events. Her public appearances, too, became noticeably fewer. The woman who had once been a fixture on red carpets was now seen entering events solo, often avoiding the flashing cameras altogether. The once constant buzz surrounding her presence had all but dissipated. While she never addressed the change publicly, the shift in her demeanor was impossible to ignore. The smile that had once been a hallmark of her public persona now seemed more reserved, and her movements appeared slower, more calculated. Even though no scandals ever erupted, no cheating rumors, no explosive arguments, there was an undeniable tension in her marriage. The cracks, though subtle at first, became increasingly apparent. At the heart of the issue was a fundamental difference in lifestyle. Pippa was part of a world that demanded visibility, where cameras followed her every move, and where social events were opportunities to shine. James, on the other hand, had spent his entire life actively avoiding the limelight. He cherished his privacy, finding solace in quiet dinners and intimate gatherings, far from the public eye. The two of them, once so full of promise as a couple, now found themselves on opposing sides of a lifestyle divide that neither could bridge completely. Pippa needed freedom, the freedom to be seen, to speak, to exist in spaces where her presence mattered, where her fashion choices were a topic of conversation. James needed peace, quiet, and the space to breathe without the weight of the world on his shoulders. Neither could fully meet the other in the middle, and over time, the balance shifted irreparably. Their attempts to compromise were apparent, but the cracks. Growing up in a household where ambition ran deep, Pippa was raised with the expectation of excellence. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had built a successful business from the ground up, and they instilled in their children the importance of education, manners, and sophistication. Pippa, however, had to navigate the complex web of family dynamics with a constant undercurrent of comparison. As the middle child, she was expected to shine just as brightly, if not brighter, than her siblings. But with those high expectations came a certain burden. Pippa wasn't just trying to carve out her own lane. She was trying to prove she could stand shoulder to shoulder with the giants in her family, even as the world watched from the sidelines. And watch they did. The public's fascination with Pippa only grew as her sister's relationship with Prince William came to the forefront. As the world turned its gaze upon Kate, Pippa inadvertently became a star in her own right. From the unforgettable moment at the royal wedding when she became the world's most famous bridesmaid to her countless appearances in the media, Pippa was forever linked to her sister's royal destiny. But as glamorous as it seemed, this constant scrutiny took its toll. Pippa's ability to maintain grace under pressure, something she had been taught from an early age, became both her strength and her weakness. The more Pippa tried to embrace the limelight, the more the pressure mounted. She was expected to be perfect, always poised, always polished, never faltering. But perfection, as anyone can attest, is a hard mask to maintain, and in time, cracks appeared. The balance between her need for public attention and her desire for private peace was a constant battle, and eventually, it became too much. How long can one woman walk the tightrope of fame without eventually falling? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into Pippa Middleton's journey and uncover what really happened behind the scenes of her high-profile marriage. The truth may be more complex than anyone ever imagined. Pippa Middleton's journey from a public figure, admired for her elegance and poised image, to the quieter, more withdrawn person we saw in her later years, is a striking one. The tension between her public life and her private struggles, especially within her marriage to James Matthews, reveals a lot about the cost of fame, identity, and expectations. While Pippa had been shaped by the Middleton family's emphasis on excellence, social intelligence, and the importance of a well-polished image, the pressure of living up to both personal and family expectations gradually became overwhelming. Her rise to fame was not just a result of her sister Kate's royal status, but also her own strategic positioning within London's elite circles. She earned recognition in her own right. But no matter how far she climbed, the shadow of Kate and the royal family loomed over her achievements. It was a paradox. Pippa was celebrated for her style, grace, and lifestyle, but she never felt completely recognized for her own accomplishments. Everything felt tinged with the idea that her success was tied to her royal sister. In her marriage, this dynamic continued to play out. Pippa's desire for James to share her public life, to step into the limelight with her and be part of her world, was in constant conflict with his desire for privacy. He wasn't interested in the glitzy, media-driven world that Pippa had entered. The more she leaned into her public persona, the more James withdrew into his own private sphere. This tug-of-war between Pippa's need for visibility and James's retreat into seclusion put a strain on their relationship, one that couldn't be solved with a vacation or a few more public appearances. Behind closed doors, Pippa was also dealing with a sense of disconnection. She was raising children, managing a family, and trying to maintain her image as the perfect wife, mother, and public figure. But this performance of perfection came at a cost. She became emotionally drained, retreating from the spotlight in subtle ways, changing her wardrobe, appearing at fewer events, and becoming less vocal. The public could read between the lines even if she didn't say a word. The pressure of living up to an ideal that no longer suited her led Pippa to ask herself some difficult questions about her identity. Who was she beyond the Middleton name, beyond the label of Kate's sister and James's wife? And who was she if she stopped trying to be perfect and simply lived for herself? Then came the tension with Vogue Williams, James's sister-in-law, which added another layer to the already complicated narrative. While nothing was ever said outright, the subtle digs and whispers in the media suggested there was more beneath the surface. Vogue's podcast became an indirect battleground, where thinly veiled remarks were made about phony perfection and royals, which many believed were directed at Pippa. It became clear that Pippa's carefully constructed image was being chipped away from all sides, both by her marriage and by family dynamics. Despite the public silence surrounding her marriage and any potential separation, Pippa's actions told the story. She attended events solo, her wardrobe became more subdued, and her presence in the media gradually shrank. There was no dramatic fallout, no public spectacle, but there didn't need to be. The shift in her life had already become evident. Pippa's slow disappearance from the spotlight was not just about her marriage, it was about a deeper transformation, a shift in who she was and what she wanted out of life. As the years went on, it became apparent that the marriage wasn't working as it once did. The absence of James from the public eye, the lack of shared moments between them, and Pippa's growing isolation from the media world suggested a quiet collapse. Pippa had spent years carefully crafting an image, building her identity as a public figure. But as the pressure built, that image no longer fit her reality. While we may never know the full details of Pippa's marriage or any official statement regarding their separation, the silence spoke volumes. Her gradual retreat from the spotlight, her physical and emotional exhaustion, and the subtle changes in her public image were all signals that she was moving on to a new chapter of her life. Pippa Middleton's story is a reminder of the complex, often hidden costs of fame, how it can shape your identity, strain relationships, and ultimately leave you questioning who you really are. The pressure to be perfect can be suffocating, and sometimes the hardest thing is learning to let go of the image you've worked so hard to build. Thank you for following along on this journey. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more content about Pippa's next steps and what the future might hold for her beyond the spotlight.